Welcome to Facilitate's digital content platform once again. We're here in Miami and we're talking to Marken and UPS, Ariette, Strien, and John Menna. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supply chain logistics is a real crucial topic. It's certainly come up in a number of different sessions that we've been hosting. And I wanted just to quickly reflect. So UPS acquired Marken quite recently. And I would see this as quite a strategic play into the life science field. Why is it so important that we get logistics right for the advanced therapeutic field, and why is UPS interested in joining it?
Sure. So UPS has been active in the pharmaceutical and medical supply chain for many, many years. Virtually since the beginning of our company over 100 years ago. During that time, and obviously most recently in a much accelerated fashion, medicine has become much more complex. And as that medicine has become incredibly complex, so have the supply chains associated with moving and transporting those medications. We talk about biotech products, which required refrigeration and different types of transportation than what was traditionally needed for a small molecule pharmaceutical. And now getting into advanced therapeutics when it involves cell and gene therapy and patient cells being part of the manufacturing process and all the complexity associated with that. Obviously the supply chain is much more complex and much more critical, and much more vigilance is required to run those supply chains. And an understanding of the medicine behind the science behind the medicine becomes an important part of the supply chain as well. So UPS, recognizing that and being in the middle of that, recognizes that we needed to have some additional capabilities, some additional expertise, some additional credibility, and Marken has all of that and has been working very closely in this healthcare supply chain, and more specifically clinical trial supply chain and cell and gene therapy supply chain.
If we reflect on, only last night we were listening to Novartis talking about the success with the CAR-T trial, and transporting their goods, how critically important it was to get it at the right time and the right place. Can you perhaps talk to us a little bit about how supply chains are so critical for new clinical trials, these advanced therapeutics, as the field widens and encompasses lots of different indications?
In fact, it's really part of the whole feasibility to be even able to conduct clinical trials in this area, because as you correctly said, it's highly sensitive material. You can start with the tumor cells or the plasma and with the ATMP at the end, but in fact everything depends on the treatment of the patient. So you have in many cases one manufacturing site worldwide, so you need to be able to get the different products within a very strict timeline and within the right temperature to that manufacturing site. So that limits as well the whole development. So Novartis really succeeded to go more global because they recognized early on that you would need to look at the second manufacturing site if the treatment and the costs allow it. But we work with many other customers where the main focus will be in one region, either the US or Europe, in order to enable the patients to be treated in time and to be sure that, in fact, the supply chain is completely controlled. So this is completely a shift in the paradigm from clinical trials 10 years ago, where it was straightforward transportation with no temperature control, no impact, and the value of the drugs or even the products in itself is completely different today than it was 10 years ago.
And I suppose that brings me on to the question of identity chain, and obviously regulatory bodies are looking at safety issues and making sure that particularly if you're looking at autologous cell products, that they get to the right patients and even after manufacturing. In terms of establishing that critical identity chain, how is Marken and indeed UPS approaching that problem or indeed that opportunity?
In fact, so we have looked at different possibilities. You're right, it's the most important part is the chain of identity. So we started to work on GPS trackers in itself with a unique key in the GPS tracker, and develop what we call sentinels, so baby GPS trackers you can have with every single part of the different vials, or let's say the tumor cells or the plasma, so you can track the patient. However, on top of that, of course, you have a unique identifier for the patient coming from the pharma company or from the CRO. And we're also working with other companies who have specialized software in order to allow that we can interface our GPS tracking with their software to track the patient from the first sample, which becomes more or less, the API, if you want, from the product to the final ATMP back to the patient.
And UPS, of course, work with a number of different industries and can bring that expertise into this field, no doubt.
Yeah, so if you think about it, UPS has been tracking packages for dozens and dozens of years, right? The IT concept behind it is very similar. It's unique identifiers to an individual package, with information captured along a transit line, and then having that information available to be shared with many different organizations, and then building those very important links through either APIs or specific apps to give access in a seamless way to that information. Likewise, there's serialization in the medical device industry where there's serialized products down to the individual product that has to be tracked through the entire supply chain. So having worked in some of those industries and worked with that, the basic infrastructure and learnings and processes are the same, applied to in a very different way for a specific patient going through an entire cell and gene process.
And I saw those devices on your stand today, and they're not just GPS devices. They're cryogenic temperature. Can you touch a little bit more on what else these do?
Yes. In fact, it is a product which is unique, and you're right. It measures as well the vibration. It measures, in fact, humidity, light. So if there's any intervention, etc., we can exactly define, as you said, the temperature. We do the geofencing, which is critical, of course, for those products. So we see exactly, we can geofence either the apheresis center or the manufacturing site or the whole lane, so that we are controlling that from A to Z. But more importantly, so we have these trackers now. We transported over $6.8 million of value of drugs last year. But you need as well a whole center behind to make sure that we track the GPS trackers. So what we have done is we have set up a global control center, which is working 24 hours, and the thousands of packages we have worldwide with these treatments in each shipment are tracked by a whole team day and night, and we can intervene immediately when we see that something is going wrong.
Yeah, it must be quite a specialised skill. I mean, I've also heard a lot about the training that comes with when you have the staff. It's not just shipping a letter, or you have to train the staff to do it. And indeed, Marken and UPS must be really setting the standard for that system or the whole infrastructure.
I mean, do you want to comment, John, as well?
Sure. So there's a lot of different components to the logistics associated with what Ariette just talked about with these tracking devices. And as she mentioned, when an event happens that was not supposed to happen, it triggers a recovery and rescue operation. And then it goes into place there. But one of the things that you were talking about is these devices and the different types of packaging materials, whether it's a reusable type of packaging that's used for some of the temperature controlled shipments. There's a significant returns logistics component associated with getting those devices back, getting that reusable packaging back, reconditioning it and reusing it appropriately for the next shipment.
And I suppose my final question was, we're looking at a field of medicine that is, we had, for example, GSK talk about a gene therapy, a rare disease gene therapy, but it's only going to expand to bigger populations, and obviously the logistical challenges with dealing multiple patients. We're talking hundreds of patients rather than tens of patients. What investment is required now to establish this infrastructure, I suppose, as the industry in general, but also from particular projects? And how does that link in with the success of this field in the next decade or so?
So it's a good question. It's one we discuss on a regular basis. So throughout our network, so cryogenic is key. So one of the big investments for us is that we have in our network filling stations in all main regions and cities and countries in order to be able to cover that network, because again, the value of the products are critical here. Furthermore, it depends on how far we go with the development. So when you go into commercial production, for ATMP, we have discussions ongoing where we are even ready to either build a GMP facility or enhance the GMP facility we have already to enable the storage of the vials. So it depends again, if we want to go into the whole kind of cycle from the commercial side with reimbursement, the software we have, when do you trigger the sending of the vials, when do you get the green light, how do you schedule the first appointment, again, if you have tumor cells, when are you going to ask the patient to get to the apheresis center in order, to get the plasma shipped out, etc. So all of that needs to be linked. So we have many discussions to build these partnerships in order to become the supply chain partner, not just for the clinical, but as well for the commercial part. But it's a lot of investment.
No doubt.
So this is where the overlap and the combination of both UPS and Marken really makes sense and becomes very helpful to life science companies. Because UPS has built an infrastructure pretty large around the globe, not just with transportation and logistics, but also warehouses, and specifically, in many cases, GMP-specific warehouses. Whereas what Marken has built and continues to build is all the processes and procedures about nitrogen filling stations for cryogenically shipped products in a Dewar configuration, and the clinical and clinical trials related procedures and licenses required to do many of the configuration to support those shipments. Now, when you take the infrastructure that UPS has built and many of the capabilities that Marken has, and you overlay that, that becomes a global infrastructure to support the expansion and the growth of life sciences, specifically in cell and gene and other types of therapies.
That sounds like fascinating work. We'll have to catch up in 12 months' time, and you have to tell me some of the projects that you've been doing. It's great.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you for your time.